Change your heart, change your life, change the planet.
Hey everybody, it's Tim Van Orden out for a very sticky, hot run on the Bolles Brook Fire Road in Woodford, Vermont, which is in the middle of the Glastenbury Wilderness, which is one of my favorite places to get lost. You can see the bridge for the fire road right there, and it's super, super hot today. It's about 90 degrees and 90% humidity, but in the woods here it's nice and, well, it feels cooler because you don't have the sun pounding down on you because we're in the jungles of Vermont. And as I was running in, I passed some people coming out in a truck. They have a camp about a mile further up the road. And I stopped to talk to them. And the woman, first off, said, "Are you out for a hike?" Which was strange to me because I was running up to them as before I stopped. And I said, "I'm out for a run." And she said, "Make sure you hydrate. It is so hot, it's so dangerous. Make sure you hydrate." Okay. And then we talked a little bit more. And she was telling me that the gate that I was now meeting them at, that a mama bear and some cubs have been hanging out there this week, and that I should be really careful. And that I probably shouldn't be out here running alone. So I thanked her for the information. And she said, "Enjoy your hike," and then drove off with her husband and kids. And it strikes me so strange how other people put their concerns onto us, and also how that affects my own thinking as I'm out here running. This is something I do every day, regardless of the heat, regardless of the cold. It's something that I've trained my body to do. My body is very well adapted to running in the heat or running in the cold. I don't bring liquid or food with me. I'm not wearing a pack or belt of any kind. I just come out here and I run. And drank about 16 ounces of water before the run. And I'll drink some more when I'm done, but I don't bring anything with me. And I'm not worried about hydration because of the adaptation my body's gone through. But she doesn't know that. But yet she's concerned for me. She also doesn't realize that I run deep, deep, deep in these woods, way beyond where her camp is. And I interact with bear quite frequently, I would say. Never had an issue. Probably never will have an issue with bear. They usually just run away. They don't like people, and especially in the wilderness. When bear come in contact with homes and there's garbage cans or bird feeders and whatnot, then the bear can get a little bit more aggressive because there's a food source. And they don't know that it's your house. They don't understand ownership. All they know is this is a food source and you're near their food source. So they can become aggressive. But in the wild out here, especially if they're doing a good job of not putting garbage out and taking it with them every time they leave their camp, the bear are pretty skittish. They're not protecting a food source like they would near a home. So they run away, but she's concerned for me again. And as I'm running, I notice that I'm concerned too. I'm looking out for bear more than I would if I had just been out here by myself. I know there are bear here. I know there are moose here. There are rumors that there's a family of wolves living in this area. I don't know if that's true. There have been mountain lions passing through this area, but I doubt any of them have taken up residence. And I don't really worry about these things. It's just, part of running through the woods. It's their home, it's not mine. So running through their home, I know that they're going to be here, and I respect that. And I'm also not afraid of it. But now she's planted the seed that I need to be concerned. I need to be concerned about the heat, about hydration, and about bears. So I'm on the lookout. I'm on alert. And as I'm running on alert, I'm listening to a book called 10% Happier by Dan Harris, which is an interesting book. It's mostly the story of his life so far. I'm about 3 hours in, and he's just telling the story of his life. And at this particular moment, before I stopped to make this video, he was talking about Eckhart Tolle and how he read his second book, I think A Whole Earth or A New Earth, I forget. It's been so long since I've read Eckhart Tolle. And he's annoyed by what Eckhart Tolle is saying, but he's also fascinated by it. And it reminded me of why I don't like Eckhart Tolle's work. So as I'm thinking about bears and being scared and listening to him describe Eckhart Tolle's philosophy, it brought up in me this need to protect people from information like that which Eckhart Tolle shares. And I'm in the midst of that experience. There's a little bit of fear in me because of the interaction I had with the woman. I'm a very sensitive person, so I pick up on the emotions of other people and I take them inside of me because they're telling me about my environment. And human beings are incredibly important to other human beings. So when a human being shares important information, my brain soaks that up and says, okay, I need to now incorporate this into my experience. That's what is. There are certain regions of the brain that mediate or that process this type of information. That's their job. And it's not bad, it's not wrong, it's not negative, it's just a part of my brain doing its job. And what I've learned how to do is to simply acknowledge that. There's a part of my brain that's on alert. Okay. There's a part of my brain that's feeling a little bit of fear. Okay. It's not going to change my run. It's not going to stop me from running. I'm just going to notice that these things are happening. They're not negative. They're not bad. But people like Eckhart Tolle will tell you that there are negative emotions and there are positive emotions. And the negative emotions have a lower frequency. And the positive emotions have a higher frequency. They're the emotions of enlightenment. They're the emotions of being present. But when you're having a negative emotion, you're not present. You're stuck in a story. You're stuck in a loop. And it's simply not true, first of all. Positive emotions are just as likely to be delusional and not present as negative emotions. Being present is not what people think it is. Our brain is always being present, always. Now, is our consciousness always present? Yes, but not always to the outside world. Our consciousness, when it is being utilized, when we actually are conscious, we might be present to our own thoughts. We might be present to the emotions that our body is creating as it tries to alert us to the world around us, or even tries to alert us to a particular thought that we might have just had that reminds us of something that we should be concerned about. And that concern may not be related to the world we're in right now. Maybe it's related to something I need to do later in the day or something that happened last week. Or as I started running and had that conversation with this woman, my brain is present to a conversation in the past, or at least my consciousness is. But what neuroscience tells us is that consciousness is made up of many different regions in the brain. It's not one thing. It's not like there's this consciousness in me that's distinct and separate and pure, existing outside of my brain. Consciousness is something that flows in and out, and it moves around in the brain. Different parts of the brain are basically turning up the dials of consciousness in one regard, in one moment, and then another part turns up the dial in another moment, so we are conscious of different things. And that consciousness itself changes and flows, modulates like waves going up and down, and it's moving. It's never just one pure thing, as people like Eckhart Tolle would tell you. And that it's pure and it's positive, and if there's any negativity, you're in a lower frequency and you're not being present. It's just simply not true. He clearly hasn't studied the latest breakthroughs in neuroscience. Our brain is many organs jammed into one skull, and they're each doing their jobs, and the brain itself is always present. The brain itself is picking up billions of pieces of information every second, and then filtering that information and deciding what to send to consciousness. Okay, I'm picking up, I think it's around 11 billion bits of data. I could be wrong about that, but I think that's a number that neuroscience is now telling us. Our brain can pick up 11, or does pick up 11 billion bits of data per second, but then only sends a tiny, tiny stream to our consciousness. And it's making judgments. It's assessing what's relevant, what's not relevant. And that relevance has a lot to do with my self-concept, with my identity. Who am I right now? Am I a runner right now? Am I a guy making a video right now? Am I a guy worried about the temperature, worried about how comfortable I am in my environment? I know a lot of people like this. It's always about their comfort level. That's who they are. I'm either comfortable or I'm uncomfortable. And if I'm uncomfortable, that is the main focus of my identity, and you're just going to hear me complaining all the time. So presence and consciousness they're not the primary, there's a little bit of sun breaking through the clouds now. They're not the primary movers in our life, in our existence. They're secondary, and they're simply tools that the brain turns on or employs when it thinks that there'll be value in doing so. If you look at the work of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who wrote the book Flow and basically created the field in psychology around flow states, what he'll say, or what his research shows, is that when you're in a state of flow, you're really not even conscious. You're not even present. And you don't need this thing called identity. You don't need that tool in that moment, because other parts of your brain are running on autopilot. They're fully engaged. You don't need to be deliberate. You don't need to make conscious decisions. You don't even really need to be aware of what you're doing, or how you're doing it, I should say, or why you're doing it. You're simply doing it. Now, you can get present to the fact that you are doing it, and you can get present to the experience of, wow, look at how well I'm ice skating, or look at how well I'm jumping over these rocks, or look at how well I'm playing the violin. Whatever that experience is, you can get an awareness of it, but you don't need to try to modulate it or control it. In fact, one of the best ways to take somebody out of the flow state, if you're competing with them, is to ask them how they're doing something. You're playing tennis with someone and they just hit a mean stroke, and you say, wow, could you tell me exactly what you did? Is it a particular angle? Like, where were your hips and where were your shoulders, and when did you initiate? Like, at what point did you know when to swing? If you get somebody to consciously think about these things, they leave the flow state, and suddenly now they're in this state of deliberation, and they can no longer function in that state anymore, and they'll choke. So athletes are doing really, really well until you get them to think about what's going on. They become self-conscious. They become present to their consciousness and how their body is engaging in the world and how that relates to their self-concept. If I do this well, my identity will be celebrated. If I do it poorly, my identity may be ridiculed or demoted. So you become conscious of how it relates to you as a self-concept, which is, again, simply a tool. And we're taught by people like Eckhart Tolle that this consciousness is the primary thing. It's the most important thing, and it's pure. And it should be positive, and we need to be in the now, and we need to be present. But what he doesn't understand is that now, that present, and the conscious experience of that, if it's being deliberate, if I'm consciously trying to deliberate about my now experience, I'm no longer able to really flow with that experience. And secondly, my brain, as a multitude of organs, is filtering what I'm present to. And another part of my brain can be present to that. And this is what mindfulness practice is, where one region in the brain or a couple regions in the brain get present to the fact that my brain is filtering. Like, I'm focused on the run, I'm focused on where to put my feet, I'm focused on the temperature. But wait a minute. Are you aware that there's the sound of the stream over there? You hear it better when I point the phone over there? Are you aware of the sun hitting you right here and how my forehead's starting to feel warm? Are you aware of the rock underneath my foot that I'm wobbling back and forth on? It's kind of slippery. Like, what am I aware of? Am I aware of, if I look at the camera that I'm facing at, these leaves back here are all lit up bright and there's a log, looks like a mossy log right there. Am I aware of that? Like, what am I conscious to? What is my brain filtering out? What is my brain saying is relevant or irrelevant? And then noticing that. But even then, we're not going to get a complete picture, because the brain is going to tell us that, okay, there are trees all around me, but I'm not going to focus on each individual leaf. I'm not going to focus on what kind of trees they are or what their bark looks like or how many branches they have. although my brain is present to all of that information, it's present to all of that information, 11 billion bits per second, but it's telling me you don't need to know that. It's not important. So just trees. Trees are good enough. And it's going to paint a picture in my mind's eye of trees. And it's not going to be 100% accurate, but that's okay. It's good enough. Brain's like, it's good enough to know that you're in the forest surrounded by trees. Beyond that, we don't need to know about the leaves. So again, this idea that there are negative thoughts that are problematic and there are positive thoughts that should be the main focus and should be celebrated it's not helpful. It sets people up to feel bad when they have negative experiences, when they have negative states, when they have negative emotions, which again are signals rising in you. Rather than judging negative as being negative, say, yeah, there's some fear in me. Yep, there's some alertness right now. I'm hyper alert for bears. Not anymore, but I was a little while ago. Okay, there's part of me that's got a little bit of fear rising up. Okay, great, I'll just notice that. Part of me that might be a little bit anxious because I've been talking too long in this video. Okay, I'll notice the anxiety, but it's not negative. It's what is. And if now is the most important place to be, well then being present to now is also being present to a little fear, a little anxiety, a little anger, a little frustration, a little depression, whatever it might be. Being present to that. Huh, that's fear. Okay, yeah. Nothing wrong with fear. Winston Churchill said there's only one thing to fear, and that's fear itself. I disagree. It's thinking that fear is a bad thing that gets us into trouble. Fear's just a signal. It's just like a sign on a road telling you to go left or right. Fear pops up and says, ooh, there's a bear if I go right, so you should probably go left to avoid the bear. Just a sign, trying to get my body to behave a certain way. If I move in this direction, the fear increases. If I move in this direction, it decreases. So my body and brain are trying to nudge me, trying to nudge my consciousness in one direction over another. That's what emotions are, trying to push us in a particular direction. And then our conscious mind makes up stories about why it wanted to go in that direction to begin with, because it doesn't want to feel like it's a puppet. So our consciousness, so celebrated by people like Eckhart Tolle, is really, it's a puppet of the brain, of the body. It's useful as a tool a lot of the time, but a lot of the time it's not necessary or important, and it could just get in the way as it tries to create stories about why it chose a particular path when really the body and brain chose that path well in advance, and because of the emotion that arose in you, you created a story about why you wanted to go there. It's my choice. Post hoc rationalization. Anyway, I'm getting bitten by bugs and spiders crawling on my legs and little fish swimming in the stream. I'm going to go run now and think more about this stuff and listen to 10% Happier, and maybe 10% of the book will actually be information and not story. So far it's all just story, but still it gets me to think. All right, I love you guys. See ya. And what I do on most challenging days is I go fishing. And what I mean is that there's a part of my brain that is the big, powerful, primitive fish.